Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. I'm David Bird with Reality Reimagined. I'm an award-winning photographer and Photoshop artist that specializes in fantasy composite art. And today I want to take you through a little bit of a deeper dive of the Reimagined plugin for Adobe Photoshop 2021 and above. This plugin is a full artistic tool for anyone to use in Photoshop, again 2021 and above, that reflects the three fundamentals that I consider the most poignant in Photoshop and digital photo editing, and that's color, luminosity, and detail. Those three fundamentals are the core foundation of everything that I do in all of my artwork with Reality Reimagined. And this plugin has been a long time coming. It's something I'm very proud of because it shares my artistic process with the entire world. Now, this plugin is something that can be a leaping off point for you to be able to color grade, to be able to add details and luminosity values to your artwork. But it's really meant to be purely that, a leaping off point. It's not a one and done, although it can be if you wish, and certain images will respond better to certain color grades that are inside the plugin. But its true power can be utilized by pushing the different layers with subtle little techniques in Photoshop that if you don't know, now you will know once you're done watching this video today. So let's dive into Photoshop, take a look at an image, and explore the Reimagined plugin and see what we can create with our artwork. First and foremost, to get us started, I want to make a couple of introductions. First, the remarkable talent you see in this image. Her name is Astrid. She's a traveling model who is incredibly versed in multiple genres of photography. I had the fortune of working with her just recently, and it was truly an amazing experience. You can see more of her beautiful artwork by visiting the Instagram account at the link below. She's standing in front of a background. It's one of 6 that I designed for a great company called Intuition Backgrounds. Intuition has a whole host of backgrounds that is applicable to multiple genres of photography. They have beautiful props, all kinds of wonderful stuff, different mediums, different sizes. There is a link in the description below to this specific background and the ones that I've designed for them, but I highly encourage you to look around the site and see what they have available. Again, multiple genres of photography are represented by these backgrounds, different mediums, different sizes. You will not be disappointed, so check out Intuition Backgrounds. So this artwork, it's been retouched using frequency separation, dodging, and burning, all the basics of retouching that I utilize. If you're new to digital photo editing, take a look at the card above. That will take you to the retouching series here on this channel when you're done with this video, so you can explore all those different techniques in Photoshop. Now we're ready with this image to go into the artistic enhancement, the color grade, the edit, whatever term you want to put onto it, and we have to make some decisions. Over the 20+ years that I've been doing digital photo editing, those decisions and what I needed to do next was where I would often get stuck. I would start learning different techniques on how to add contrast values or a cool technique to add a flare or something along those lines. And I would start doing all these random one-off things that had no through line to the artistic value of what I was trying to put into the artwork itself. And that's something that kind of drove me batty as I was working and I was learning and developing my skill set in Photoshop specifically. I knew what I could see in my mind and in my imagination, but I didn't know how to produce it from a systemic approach. So as I learned over 20+ years, I started developing actions of my own design that gave me different tools and techniques to leap off from. These actions were not one and done. And the actions long ago in the beginning days of Photoshop, I'm going to sound like Clint Eastwood sitting on the porch drinking coffee going, well, when I got started in Photoshop, there wasn't any Lightroom and your little buttons and Instagram. Anyway, when you go through this process of trying to find what to do with an image, you have to develop a systemic approach. You have to ask yourself the questions, what do I need to see in the values and the colors, and what do I need to do on top of the artwork of the photography to finalize and complete the journey of the art making? And that's how I kind of got to those 3 fundamentals of color, luminosity, and detail. So the actions that I would develop would provide me different tools in Photoshop to leap off from that systemic approach of color, luminosity, and detail. And when I developed the Reimagined plugin, it was my way to be able to bring my 4 main artistic styles that I have used for 20+ years to all of you, but to do it in a way that was intuitive to follow the 21st century and be able to give you buttons and controls instead of giving you actions that would populate one of my actions actually populates like 30 different adjustment layers and steps and techniques. And I, the artist who knows what all of those things do, would then systemically go through all of them and tweak each one until I got the artwork to where I wanted it to be. So that's what I want to take you through today with the plugin, because the folks who have purchased it, which thank you so much, by the way, for doing that, they have reached out to me and said, I love it, but I'm having some troubles because every now and then I'm seeing that it isn't the looks that I like, the style that's one of my favorites, it isn't hitting on all of my images the right way. And I respond to every one of them and tell them that's what it's supposed to do. The color grade styles and the options here, you have to be able to adapt them to the imagery and take it a little bit further. So that's what I want to show you today in all of this. So the first choice that I want to make, of course, is to go systemically through the plugin, starting with color. Now, there are 4 styles that are baked into this. If you mouse over any one of them, it's going to give you a brief description of what it does. If we look at the color palette of this imagery, there's a lot of teal. Astrid has red hair, she's got fair skin. So ultimately, I know that I'm probably going to gravitate towards style number 4, which is a classic cinema color grade that is popular in Hollywood films. It's teal and orange. Those two colors are opposite each other on the color wheel. Regardless of your ethnicity, every human being on Earth has orange in their skin tone. So we're going to use teal in the shadows and we're going to use orange in the highlights, and that's going to create a beautiful color harmony and get us started and off to the races of finishing this artwork. So I'm going to go ahead and click the button. It's going to generate the look and give you that color grade immediately. Now, the color grade works beautifully as it is right now with this image. So we could consider this one and done for this step in the plugin and continue to move forward. But I want to talk about a couple of things. One of the advantages of the plugin itself, the Reimagined plugin, is that if you've ever used any kind of preset in Photoshop or Lightroom, if you've ever used a color lookup table, you are incredibly limited in what you can do to effect those looks and the things that those presets and color lookup tables do to the artwork. Really, you only generally most of the time have one way to effect it, and it's just to reduce the opacity of the layer that it produces, or whatever you do in Lightroom to reduce the opacity of those things. I don't use Lightroom, nothing against it, it's a great program, I just don't use it. I'm a Photoshop boy. So in this case with the plugin, we were able to take the color grades that I use and separate them into 2 key fundamental layers, one for color and one for luminosity. Again, color, luminosity, and detail. So that when you look at this, you have the easiest option to be able to start playing with the design and augmenting it and fine-tuning it to your artwork. And that's to turn them off. To click the button in the layer stack and turn, I don't know why that's so funny to me, but it is. So turning off the layer, immediately if I turn off the layer that is dedicated to color of this color grade of step 1, then I can see what the luminosity values are happening or what it's doing to the image with this color grade. So I can immediately go, okay, well, maybe this color effect is too strong. So if I turn it off, I can see, oh yeah, it was way too strong, or I like some of the original color values of the original imagery, so I want to pull down the opacity, which is the first basic thing that you can do to augment any kind of preset lookup table or the results that you can see in the Reimagined plugin. So as we pull down the opacity, we can start to see some controls here and some fine tuning to the image. Now, I like the color grade itself. I think it looks great, but I'm going to go ahead and turn off the luminosity layer, and instantaneously I'm starting to see some of the original contrast, the black point coming back through this color grade, which is a function of this plugin in Photoshop, the Reimagined plugin. So this starts to give me some ideas on how to tweak these looks, to use the Reimagined plugin as a tool to take my vision even further with the artwork itself. So I can fade the opacity of this if I want to. Again, that one easy thing to do. And ironically, a lot of the folks have been using the plugin. Thank you for purchasing it, by the way. They've reached out to me and they've said that, hey, I love it and it's doing some great work for me, but it's not hitting one off, one and done for every one of my images. What should I do? And I keep telling them, first, I apologize that the YouTube content is not out there. I'll get it there as soon as possible. But number 2, it's not always meant to be one and done. It's meant to give you tools so that you can drive Photoshop through this plugin and start realizing your own visions. So I want to show you one tool that I utilize all the time with the plugin that gives you tremendous tremendous control and tremendous options in what you can do. And that's using a very simple tool called Blend If. Now, to get to Blend If, we need to click one of these layers. It doesn't matter which one. Let's start with, let's say, the luminosity values. I like some of that original contrast that's coming back through. If you've watched any of my previous videos on this channel, you've heard me speak and teach. I've talked about how I've always been a fan of the matte look in imagery, and I've been doing it for years. But to consistently keep growing as an artist and evolving as an artist, I challenge myself every year to do something different than what I always normally do. So in 2022, I'm trying to embrace the original contrast values, or high contrast and black points and saturation in images, instead of leaching that out to get the quote-unquote matte look. So I want to return some of that original contrast. I don't want to just simply reduce the opacity of this layer, because as I do, it's making a global change to its overall effect. I want it to be carefully targeted in certain key areas. Now, to do that, I could use a layer mask. So I could simply, while this layer is active, come down and click the layer mask icon, which my lovely face is covering up, but it's in the layer window controls at the bottom. Note to self, fix your new interface in Photoshop 2022. I just had to reinstall Photoshop. I had to completely remove all Adobe products from my computer, wipe it clean from the registry, and then reinstall it, because Photoshop 2022 was bug-ridden to no end, and that was the solution to fix everything, is just get rid of it all. This is not a rant against Adobe, but Adobe... Anyway, so make a layer mask, and this layer mask, you can start painting black on it to start hiding the overall effect in certain key areas. But the power of Blend If lets you target both luminosity values of highlight, shadow, and midtones. So to get to the Blend If dialog, this layer is selected. I can either double click anywhere on the layer where there's not words or thumbnail, and when I do, it's going to bring up the layer style window. To get to the layer style window in a more simple way, if you don't want to double click, is to simply select the layer. Again, you won't be able to see the icon. I apologize, but if you look at the bottom of the layer window, there is a button that says FX. And if you click it, you get a whole bunch of different options, and the very top one is called Blending Options. When you click that, it brings up the layer style window. The Blend If dialog is here. Now, if you've never encountered Blend If, it is an incredibly powerful tool, and I utilize it all the time in all of my artwork. And I have a video, I believe, in the retouching series that explains it further in detail and in depth, but let me just blast through it really quickly. So this option right now, Blend If for gray, you can choose red, green, and blue, RGB values. Those are the main values of how Photoshop understands color in an image. But for gray, that's the one that you want to select for this technique, and most often how you're going to use it. You have two options here. This layer, which is whatever layer you've selected, or the underlying layer, which is whatever layers are beneath it. So these triangles represent the shadows and the highlights. And as we drag the highlights toward the shadows, it starts to turn gray, which is the midtones. This is a reflection of any type of luminosity tool in Photoshop. You have access to shadows, highlights, and midtones, and those are represented by three colors, which is white, black, and gray. So if I start taking, and if you'll watch the image of Astrid, if I say this layer, I want to take the shadows and blend them out. It's going to look for the gray values in the image and say, all right, let's start blending it based upon gray or the midtones and taking those shadows out. Now, as I stretch it out, we're starting to get that overall look of what we saw when we turned off the luminosity layer. If I go to the underlying layer and say, I want the shadows of the underlying layer to come up and through this layer that I've selected. So if I grab this and drag it to the right, the original shadow values are coming up and through the effects or the two layers populated by the Reimagined plugin. Now, quick tip for the Blend If dialog, as you move this triangle, it's not feathering the effect. So you're going to get some funky banding and some weird kind of looks into the image. Photoshop, unfortunately, doesn't have a great way of telling you how to do this, but you need to feather the effect. And to do that, hold Alt or Option and click the triangle right in the middle, and it's going to split the triangle. So now that you have two, if you grab this furthest right one and start taking it in, you're essentially setting an output, and then you grab this one and you can bring it further in to set an input, so that this is a little bit more finesse and control, and you get just one more step of how you want this to come into play. So this one option right here, underlying layer, Blend If, taking the shadows of the underlying layer, the original contrast values, and pushing them up and through the layer that was created by the Reimagined plugin. That gives you another level of control, another level of stylization to the artwork, and it is often one that I do all the time. So if you liked the one and done of clicking style number 4 and you liked the way it looked as it was, great. Continue to the other options of step 2 and step 3 in the Reimagined plugin. But I encourage you to take the time to do the blend if, because this is part of the power of us designing this plugin this way so that you can get this finesse and control, which you simply don't have those levels of control with presets and with color lookup tables and things of that nature. So being able to do this, it's a wonderful way to explore a whole bunch of different options. But we can also say like, hey, I like the light values of the original image and I want them to come up and through as well. So hold Alt or Option, split the triangle, and start feathering the effect and just see what it gives you. See how it affects the brightest points in the image. The closer that we bring these two triangles back to center, the more that they're going to meet in that hard defined edge, and we'll start seeing those different patterns come up into play. So I'm liking the original contrast values there at this point. I think they look fine, so I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And I can do the same thing with the color layer if I want to. I'm going to go to the blend if dialog by double clicking on the layer where there's no words or an image, and I'm going to say this layer, I don't want the highlights to be there. I don't like the color highlights, and so teal and orange, the teal is in the shadows, the orange are in the highlights. So let's go ahead and bring the highlights down. And a fast way to see what it does is just to take the triangle fully and just start stretching it, back to the left. So we can start to see some of the original orange highlight tones that are there with the artwork itself by saying I want to take these and make them go away, or I can say I want the original highlight tones to come up and through the dialogue. So I'm going to hold Alt or Option and split the triangle to start getting that finesse and control and letting some of those little values come back through and see what we get. So a way to explore your options with the Reimagined plugin, especially for step number 1, is to get the style that you like, and then start exploring the blend if options with these two different layers and see how things work. And again, this whole plugin was designed to give you leaping off points so you know what to do next once you've retouched the image and start your journey of the artistic enhancement of your image. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And then move on to the luminosity values. Now, the luminosity values, the first option is to select a matte value. Again, that's something that I'm trying to avoid in 2022, but I'm going to go ahead and choose the light matte value. And this is being achieved by a curves adjustment layer set on a blending mode of luminosity at full opacity and fill. I encourage you to play with this and start getting some experimentation going. When you find a look that you like and it works, take the time to just jot down the values really quickly of what you did and apply it to other images utilizing the same steps that you did in the Reimagined plugin and see how it resonates with different images. This lets you build a library of styles, of looks, so that as you're working as an artist and you go, you know what, I want to do some like deep contrast work and get some cool colors and tones, I can do these certain steps using the Reimagined plugin for this specific photo shoot. It gives you a goal and a target to shoot for before you even pick up the camera, so to speak. Now, in this case with the matte values, since I'm trying to go back to contrast, one of my options here is to again play with this tool that is generated by the plugin. So I'm going to come to the icon of the curves adjustment layer here and click it, then double click, which will bring up the properties window. And I'm going to make a classic S curve. This is how we added contrast long ago. In the early days of the Photoshops. I started with Adobe Photoshop 4.0. I briefly played around with 3.0, but then my first copy of Photoshop was 4.0, and it's been a dream since. Anyway, so I'm going to make an anchor point right here into the center of the curve adjustment layer, and I'm going to make the classic S curve, and that's immediately bringing me some contrast values back to the scene. But part of the blending options and the way that this was created by the plugin, we're getting some interesting values to the highlights. Now, the highlights here is a reflection of the lighting pattern that I specifically chose to be able to create those deep shadows underneath Aster's jawline and her body so that we could really cut her with the light and sculpt her with the light itself. So making this basic S curve, I can sit here and tweak the values and bounce things around to see where I'm getting. And look at how dramatic the image is becoming now simply by experimenting and playing around with the tools that are generated by the plugin from the systemic approach of color, luminosity, and detail. And at any point, if any other window is opened up in Photoshop by clicking the properties window, and the Reimagined window closes. Just go back to the icon, the purple R, and click it, and you'll go back into the plugin itself. So double clicking to see the curves adjustment again here, we can really deepen the saturation effects if we want to. I like this overall value. I think it looks great, but we're just getting a little too dark in that black point. We're getting a little too much contrast, but I love the way the light's hitting. So I want some of the matte to come back through. Guess what I'm gonna do? Blend if, double click on the layer where there's not a word or a picture or a thumbnail, and open up that layer blending option or layer styles window. I'm going to let the original values start to come up and through, which is going to let some of that effect from the color grade here come back into play. The underlying values coming up and through the thing that I'm working on right now with blend if. Okay, I think that looks great. We're still getting some of those key kicker highlights. I think it looks lovely. If at any point I think this is not working the way it was, I liked some of that darkness and I want to go back a step, I can do so many different things. I can take the anchor point and start increasing the contrast values even further, decrease them, see what it looks like blown out, all this weird stuff, and start to get ideas, artistic ideas, which was the whole point when I developed my actions long ago. The first point was, what do I do now once I've retouched the image? And number two, I want options. I want to play in the realm of imagination and in Photoshop, and those are the options that you're getting there. So again, many more things to explore, but these are some of the basic things that you can do with what the plugin generates for you. Now let's go on to the next step under the luminosity options here, and that's for adding contrast. So I'm going to go ahead and click light. To add those contrast values back in there, we've got the contrast adjustment layer. Same thing, tweak the numbers. Double click the icon to get the properties window. It's set to a brightness of 15 and a contrast value of 15. Decrease it. So right now I think the highlights are just too strong by this step because we were messing around with them with that curves adjustment layer. So let's go ahead and reduce the brightness back to 0, and I think that looks good. Maybe give it just a little push when we get to like 5. That looks lovely. Now we can push the contrast even more. We can decrease the contrast, and we start getting more interesting effects both on how the color is being enhanced by contrast sliders in Photoshop, or ultimately what we're seeing in those luminosity values. Now I think those luminosity values are just a little bit bizarre, so I'm going to go ahead and pull it down, and I think that looks good. And we could not achieve this overall look if we didn't have the adjustment layers and we didn't start working with this, being able to produce those unique styles to the image from what we see from our imagination. Now we've hit the second step here of luminosity. Let's go to that third fundamental, and for details. Now with details, there's really not much you can do here to tweak it. So you got a lot of options for tweaking in steps 1 and 2, and not so much in steps 3. What do you want? You get 60% win here. Say you get 66% win. You got that 33.3, and you just don't get that value because details are details. Now there's different ways of achieving details and enhancing details in Photoshop. What the plugin does for you, both for the general pass here and the final sharpen, these are just purely a reflection of my artistic style and what I've done for 20+ years with all of my artwork. So not much you can do to tweak these, but going ahead and just looking at the basics, I'm going to go ahead and click the general pass for the low value of intensity, and again just change some of the opacities, use the layer mask, take it away. For instance, something that I've been doing in my artwork recently is, instead of sharpening the entire image, just keeping the original detail. I'm using a Canon R5. It's a 45 megapixel camera. Oh boy, are there a lot of details in my images. And so instead of enhancing all of the details, I've actually been inverting this mask. So click the layer mask and hit Controller Command and letter I for invert. It'll make it a black mask. It hides the entire effect. And then I just paint it in key areas like the lips, the nose, the eyes, or details of the props and so forth that we want to see. So that soft, beautiful alabaster skin stays soft in this image, and we don't have to go much further. These options, these things that you can do, these are the subject of my final thoughts for this video. So let's go ahead and jump back out of Photoshop and finish up the video today with final thoughts. The fastest way that I grew as an artist in Photoshop was not going to conventions and classes and tutorials and so forth and learning things and going, I'm going to replicate this exact thing. I took classes. I spent tons of time and resources learning from anybody that I could learn from. But I took the information they taught me made sure I understood it, then went back to my computer and said, how do I make this my own? How do I tweak this? I wanted to make sure I understood everything about one technique or tool, all of its effects, all of its options, the things that I could do with it. And then I said, how can I make this my own? Sometimes I would take the tool or the technique and just reduce the opacity by 10%. And therefore, it just achieved a little bit more of a look that was fitting to what I wanted. But quite often, I would take it and say, okay, this curves adjustment layer, well, what if it can do this? What if it can do that? And I would write down those notes. I would keep that process. And it made the artistic journey long, sure. And sometimes drove me mad, but it gave me the results that I needed. It gave me the art that I sought. And it was the perfect reward, the perfect return on the investments that I was making in myself and in my artwork. And that's why the Reimagined plugin, in my opinion, and my goal with it was to try to serve the best of both worlds. I wanted it to be a tool and resource for people who were stepping into digital photo editing for the first time, and for them to not feel lost, to give them that guided path through the artwork. But I also want people to be able to take it and say, okay, great, now I did this one layer. What if I do this? What if I do that? What if I delete it? What if I change it? What if? Remember that process, fine tune it, go further, go beyond the plugin to the point that you're making your own actions, your own presets, your own plugins. This is the beauty of the world of art and our journey and the privilege that we get to go on as artists. That concludes this video for today. If you like the content you found in this video, make sure to give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel, because new content will debut to the channel as often as I can. I have a 7-month-old and my world is turned upside down, but he's a beautiful baby and I love him so much. He's the center of my world. New content is coming to the channel that covers all types of techniques in Photoshop and in photography. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell icon to be notified of all that new content when you return to the YouTubes. Thanks so much for watching today, and until next time, I'll see you out there in the world of Photoshop.